Philadelphia, get ready to be inspired. If you need help finding the light in the darkness, don't touch that dial. Let's navigate life through the lens of hope with Scotty P. Inspirational speaker Scotty P speaks the importance of mental health in society and encourages techniques to overcome the everyday mental health obstacles that hold us back in life. It's not just inspiration, it's Scotty P Inspiration.
Good evening, Philadelphia and all the surrounding counties and those listening nationwide today. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Scotty P Inspiration Show here, recording, coming at you live from the WWDB AM 860 AM studios here in Bala Cynwyd, Philadelphia. Thank you for being here today, everybody. Welcome to Friday, welcome to your weekend, and I'm so thankful that you're choosing to spend it with me to begin your weekend here on the 6 o'clock hour, just for a half hour to get your weekend started on the right note, talk about some mental health, and find some inspiration in your life, because ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We want to help you to navigate your life through the lens of hope. So everybody, for those of you who are unaware, my name is Scott Prendergast, aka Scotty P, and I am your host. This is my show. Thanks for tuning in today. We really appreciate it. So, I'm thankful to be back in the studios today. We had to do a couple of remote ones because I was traveling for work. I was in Minnesota, I was out in Chicago, then I had a lot of other stuff going on. So I'm back in the studios today, and I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm thankful for you tuning in. So before we get started, a little bit of business very quickly. If you want to watch any previous episode, a couple ways you can do that. You can go on www.dbam.com and search the Scotty P Inspiration Show. You can watch it that way. You can go on Spotify, go on Apple Podcasts, search the Scotty P Inspiration Show. You can also go on YouTube and watch the video along with the audio, and that is Scotty P Inspiration. Check it out that way. So everybody, happy Friday once again. Glad to be here. Really looking forward to starting today. So as we always do, I'm going to start with a quote. We're going to get right into it. I would like to start with a quote to kind of set the tone for the topic and what it is we're going to be talking about today. Okay? So here's the quote that I came up with today. It is from Warren Buffett, the guy that's known for just being really rich. Okay? Quote is this: chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. Ooh, I'm going to say that again. Chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. And again, that is by Warren Buffett. I think this quote really sums up what it is that I want to talk about today with this message. Because this message is all going to be about the habits we have and how we have a tendency to hide within those habits. Now, those habits, that's personal for you, the listener, to decipher what that is. Whether it's a mental habit, a physical habit, whatever it is. But we're talking about these habits today and how we have a tendency to hide in those and how we can get out of that habit. And this quote really illustrates that very well, because a lot of times we don't even notice that we're in a habit. Right? It's too light to be felt, just like Warren Buffett said. But once those chains get so heavy in that habit, then it's tough to do anything about it, right? So what we're going to be talking about today is how to acknowledge that there's a habit, try to work through it, and develop ways that we could get ourselves out of that loop before it becomes something that becomes really, really a big, difficult process and challenge. So I always kind of think of it like this, and I want to start with this little phrase. It's something that I came up with when thinking about this message. The habits that we hide in create hurt that we hold on to. Let me say that again. The habits that we hide in create hurt that we hold on to. Now, when I say this, really what I mean is that habits are really, in a way, it's a coping mechanism. It's a negative coping mechanism. It's a negative coping skill, but nevertheless, it is a coping skill. Because nobody turns to a habit just because they say, hey, I love this so much. Sometimes, yeah, but a majority of the habits that we're talking about for this show today, those negative ones, we turn to because we feel like that's our only option, or because we feel like that's the only way we can get some type of relief from whatever it is that we're dealing with. So therefore, when we turn to these habits, really we're hiding from the problem. We're hiding from the issue. We're hiding from the hurt, the pain, whatever it is in our lives that's really giving us this grief, okay? And when we hide in that habit, it then creates a deeper pain that we hold on to. And that pain we carry around with us from day to place to place, to person. And then once we're spreading that, it really becomes something that's difficult to get out of, right? So instead of running to these habits to hide away from it, we want to identify what that habit is. But more than that, we want to dive deeper. We want to understand why we created that habit and why we're turning to it in the first place, so that we can get to the source and therefore change it from there. And that's really what I want to dive into more today. And in the second part of the show, we'll talk about that even more in depth. But as I'm on this thread here, I want to ask you, the listener, something. Because I love this show being listener-centric, and I want you, as you're listening to the show, to be able to ask yourself questions so you get more out of it. And the question I want to ask you is, why do you think that you stick to habits that you know are hurting you? I want you to ask yourself that. I want you to really think about it. Take a moment, take the rest of the show, whatever it is, but think to yourself, why do you think that you stick with certain habits that you know are hurting you? It's interesting, right? Because half of you may say, well, I don't have any bad habits, Scott, so I'm not doing that. And you might not even be aware of it. While the other half of you might think about it and say, you know what? I don't even think I have an answer. I just know that I do it, and that's that. And both of those can be equally as toxic, right? Because if we're not acknowledging it, we know that's a problem. But also, if we don't know why we do it, that's equally just as big of a problem. And habits, there's multiple layers to them, which is what's interesting, right? It's not just one thing that we pick up and then it just goes from there, but there's feelings, there's emotions, there's, running away, hiding from things, and also trying to gain things from these habits too. As humans, we're very complex creatures, therefore our habits are complex too. And why we turn to them, it's never just for one reason, but rather it's a multitude of different things. And I think that's important to understand, is knowing that there's a lot of layers to this. And I've said before on different episodes that human beings were kind of like onions, right? You got to peel back a couple layers to find out what's really stinking in there, what's really smelling, right? Same thing goes for the habits that we create. These habits are something we're hiding and covering up of a deeper problem. And if we don't dive into that problem, that habit becomes more than a habit. It starts to become a way of life. It starts to become a lifestyle. And then it starts to become a serious burden and a problem. Right? And we want to get to it before we get to that point, because that's something that's only going to make our life more difficult, right? So throughout the show, the thing to hold on to, keep asking yourself and get an answer by the time it's over, whatever it is, and write it down. What are the habits that you stick to that you know are hurting you? And while I just thought of this while I was saying that too, don't you think it's interesting how as humans, we'll know something's bad for us in our lives. We'll know that something is not going to help us, that it's going to worsen us in some type of way. It's going to cause us some type of pain or make things more of a challenge. We will know that going into it, and yet we'll still do that thing. We'll still do it. And I think that comes from this idea that we have a tendency to find dysfunction and dysfunctionality comfortable. Now, I could do a whole episode on why that is, but essentially, sometimes that feeling of dysfunction in our lives is all that we know. And that might not even be your fault. That might just be how you were raised, or your environment, where you're at, what you're used to, someone you've been with. That dysfunctionality becomes so normal and so comfortable that without it, it's almost like we don't know how to proceed. And when we're in that space of that comfort, that comfortable dysfunction, there's a lot of different things that we want to do to break that, to get out of that. But it's difficult. It's not easy. Because if it was easy to get out of it, then nobody would fall into bad habits. Then nobody would be addicted to dysfunctionality, right? There's a lot more to it that meets the eye. Because we're talking about lifetime experiences here that have created that dysfunctional space, which has then created something that you've had time to get used to, which has made it comfortable for you. But at the end of the day, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want this. I love this. I love these issues in my life. I love this problem. I love being dysfunctional. I love being around it. No one says that. It's more something you learn to tolerate. But I think what's important for us to understand is we've got to kind of snap ourselves out of that. And we've got to learn to say, hey, no, I don't have to tolerate this anymore. What can I do? What changes can I make in my life to start to peel back that level of comfort with this dysfunction, that level of comfort with that bad habit, and instead start to realize and start to feel how uncomfortable it truly is to be in that space, to be dealing with that habit, to be surrounded with that dysfunctionality. Because when we think it's comfortable, it's really a facade, because we know it's not, but maybe people have told us it is, or we felt like it is, because how many times does that happen, right? You meet this person, at a bar on the street or in school, whatever, and they kind of have this whole, that's just the way life is, and I learned to stop trying a long time ago, and you know, that whole I've been beat down so many times, I'm not going to try anymore, blah, 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 type personality, and that's fine. I'm not taking shots at anybody. But I will say that type of thinking is very contagious, and I think we have to kind of guard ourselves and put our armor up, so to speak, so that we don't let that level of discontentment and dysfunctionality become our new normal. But instead, we continue to realize that as something foreign, so to speak, in our bodies and in our lives, and want to get rid of it and fight back against it so that we can truly live the way that we want to, right? And like I said, we're going to dive deeper into this in the second part, and we're going to talk about specific examples on how to do that. But before you get to that, we've got to make sure we acknowledge it and we identify it. Because nothing gets done mentally in this world if we're not going to acknowledge something. If we're talking about depression, anxiety, bipolar, OCD, whatever it is, none of those can be treated until we first acknowledge it. And in the same way in life, you can't move past a mental obstacle you have until we first identify what's going on. We identify it, we acknowledge it. Now we are one step forward to being able to overcome it. So it all starts with that, and bad habits and those things that are the reasons for those bad habits are no different. We got to start with identifying those as well. And that's what we're doing today. So we've got just about 2 minutes real quickly before we go to our first break. And what I want to do before our break here is I really want to flip this on you, onto the listener. That's what my whole show is about here, is trying to give you little nuggets, little tidbits that you could take and run with so that you could start your weekend off on the right mental space and on a positive note with some inspiration. I want you to take a look at your life, whether it's now or what it's been the past year, 2 years, whatever it is. I want you to take a look at that, and I want you to identify the different areas of dysfunction within your life. Now, I know that might be a little tough to do sometimes, especially if you're next to somebody that maybe you would label as causing to your dysfunction, but I want you to get it down, whether it's on your phone, write it on paper, whatever it is. Just get 3 or 4 of the dysfunctional things in your life and write them down. And each one of them, I want you to write an answer next to it. I want you to say, am I comfortable in this dysfunction? Or am I not? And for those 3 or 4 major dysfunctional things, those major habits that you might be dealing with in your life, you write those down, and next to them, it's either yes, I'm comfortable in this, or no, I am not. Now, I want you to be honest here. I don't want you to cheat and be like, well, I know Scott really wants me to say I'm not comfortable in any of them, so I'm going to write that. No, be honest with yourself. And if you're comfortable with this bad habit that you had and it's become comfortable, you need to write that down because that's identification, and that's our first step, right? So I want you to do that. And the reason I want you to do this is because this is just a simple technique for you to learn to identify those areas. Because as of this point, you may say, well, I don't really think that I'm comfortable with any dysfunctional things or bad habits. I think I don't have that. But after being more introspective and thinking about it, you may find that there are a couple things. And that's okay, because that would mean that you're human like everybody else, because we all have stuff like that, right? But you want to make sure that we catch it before it becomes to the point where we can't get out of it, right? And so that's what that little exercise will do. And that's why I wanted to share that with you. And I wanted you to do that before our first break, okay? So everybody, look, we're going to be right back after this quick commercial break. We've got so much more to talk about. We're going to talk about some specific strategies that we can use to help break some of those habits, get through some of that dysfunction, and learn to become comfortable with good things instead of becoming comfortable with things that are going to hurt us, okay? So we're going to be right back at these quick commercial breaks. Do not go anywhere. Don't touch that dial. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Hey everyone, Eric Katz here, the owner of Katz Dogs Canine. Are you working from home and need to get your dog out running around for the day? Will you be traveling this summer and looking for a place to board your pup? Is your dog looking a little shaggy and need a haircut or bath? Are you looking forward to walking around and enjoying this beautiful weather, but you can't because your dog's pulling like a freight train? Well, you're in luck. We are a one-stop shop that focuses on daycare, boarding, grooming, and training. We are located at 35 Middle Road, Percy, PA, on 10 beautiful acres. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Katz Dogs Canine or our website, katzdogscanine.com. Our phone number is 855-KATZ-DOG, 855-528-9364.
What's going on, everyone? This is Scott Prendergast here, aka Scotty P. Real quick, I want to talk to you about my business. It's called Scotty P Inspiration. And what I am is I'm an inspirational speaker, and I want to help others navigate life through the lens of hope. Now, I do this through speaking engagements, but also one-on-one life coaching. So if you're interested in booking me or doing some of that coaching, let me know. Check me out at www.scottypinspiration.com or check out my Instagram at ScottyP_inspo. Find Yourself Boxes was created to foster the connection between a person and those in life who may be working through mental health challenges by providing curated and customizable boxes filled with research-backed wellness products that promote healing. Coupling personal experience with professional mental health guidance, Find Yourself Boxes meets people where they are on their journey. Wellness doesn't look the same for every person, and these products are packaged together to touch various aspects of our wellness spectrum. Find your healing with Find Yourself Boxes at findyourselfboxes.com, and you can get 20% off your first purchase. And welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much again for tuning in to another episode of the Scotty P Inspiration Show here on WWBDB 860 AM. Thank you so much, everybody. So if you're just tuning in, we are talking about different habits that we hide in today. But before we dive into that more, just some quick business for you. If you want to watch any previous episodes of this, couple ways you can do it. You could go on www.dbam.com, search the Scotty P Inspiration Show. You can watch them that way. You could search the Scotty P Inspiration Show on Spotify, on Apple Music, any major podcast platform. You could watch it that way. Or you could go on my YouTube channel, which is Scotty P Inspiration, and you can watch it and listen to it via the video that way as well. So everybody, thanks again for tuning in. I'm Scott Prendergast, aka Scotty P. I am your host. This is my show. And today we're talking about the different habits that we have a tendency to hide in. Okay? So if you're just tuning in, we were talking about really that dysfunction and how a lot of times the habits that we develop are because we're trying to cover up for something else, and there's really something deeper going on here. Okay? So with that being said, I want to kind of talk about this for the first part of our second half of the show here. What's really important for us to do, as I talked about that identification, is the reaction that we have towards identifying that something might be wrong. Okay, and I always like to place it like this. We need to replace our falling into familiarity with fast action. Okay, now what I mean by that is saying that when we start to fall into that familiar place of being in bad habits and focusing on things that are not helping us, we need to kind of counteract that, because it's so easy to go throughout your day, la-di-da, I'm going about my day, doing my thing, and then all of a sudden, it's so tempting, something happens, and you go right into that bad habit. It is real quick. You don't even think about it. Just boom, like that, you're into that bad habit. And next thing you know, that's leading you down this whole path, and now your negative self-talk's kicking in, and you find yourself swirling around in this just cycle of negativity or whatever it is, right? So when we get to that point, we can still get out of that, sure, but it's easier if we can beat it to the punch, so to speak, and we can fight back against falling into that familiar, comfortable thing that is a bad habit or whatever it might be for you, okay? So what I mean by the fast action part of it is as followed. Sometimes we have to really kind of shock the system. We use this a lot when we're talking about mental health and particularly psychiatry and or psychology and different things. Now, when I say shock the system, I'm not referencing, the old, electroshock therapy. No, although that does work for some people. That is not what I'm referencing here, just to be clear, okay? What I am referencing is that we need to really kind of try to snap ourselves into the present moment. Because a lot of times when we find ourselves falling into these habits, like I said before, we don't realize it's going on. It's just like we're on autopilot. We're just autopiloting through our day, and then, this typical bad thing happens. Oh, but it's comfortable, or oh, I'm around this dysfunction and it's comfortable, so I'll just fall into it. And we don't realize it. So by shocking the system, we need to recognize that and be like, wait a minute. And we need to be able to see that, so that we could take a different course of action that's going to lead to a different outcome, instead of us, again, falling into that cycle of negativity with that bad habit, whatever it might be. So the next logical question would be, okay, Scott, sounds real great, but how do I shock the system? Well, it's different for everybody. For me personally, because again, everything I talk about on the show, I've done and dealt with and experienced in my own life, okay? For me, one of the ways that I like to quote unquote shock the system when I feel myself going down to a bad habit is I have this background on my phone. Now, for me, just with being an entrepreneur and having my own business and being extremely busy, like most of us, my phone's always in my hand, constantly near me. I always see it. So when I find myself falling into those bad habits or starting to get complacent and comfortable with dysfunction, at some point, I'm always looking at my phone. And when I look at my phone, I have this background that has this scripture verse to me that means a lot to me on it. And every time I see that, it kind of, boom, it shocks the system. It brings me back to the current state and allows me to really put myself in a position to say, okay, I see what's going on here. I see what happened. I see that I'm tempted to fall back into this bad habit. I see that I'm starting to allow this negative self-talk to take over. And seeing that background on my phone helps to bring me back. Right? So that's what works for me. For you, it might be different. Maybe it's if you have a certain tattoo on yourself and every time you look at it, it kind of brings you back. It shocks your system back to your place. Or maybe it's, you have a certain song or whatever it is. That's for you to find out. That's not for me to tell you. It's for you to find out. But I think it's really important to have those little go-to things that can bring us back to the current moment when we're stuck in that autopilot of negativity and just falling down that path, okay? So I think that is a great first step for anybody to be able to recognize and take fast action against the familiar comfort of a bad habit, okay? Now, to go a little bit further here, one of the things that ties into this that I want to add on to what I just said is breaking the automatic association. Now, what I mean by this is that sometimes when something happens, we automatically associate it with that habit. Or we automatically say, okay, well, because I feel like this, I got to do this. I got to do this habit. I got to fall into the dysfunction. I got to do this or that. And because that event happened, we associate that event with this feeling, with this habit, and then that cycle goes over again, right? What we need to do is learn to break that automatic association. And I think one of the best ways that we do break that association is using something that I've coined. I've coined the term. I've used it plenty of times, called present moment self-questioning. Now, the idea of this is not new. It's been around for hundreds of years, but the idea of present moment self-questioning, as I call it, is exactly what it is. It is asking ourselves questions about our situation in the present moment. So, for example, let's say that you're driving down the street, or you're driving on 76 here in Philly, which, bruh, if you know about it, it's a thing. So for those listening nationwide, you probably don't know about I-76 Schuylkill Expressway. Consider yourself lucky, okay? But if you are from the area and you know about it, it's very common that someone's going to cut you off, or it's common that accidents happen, frustrating things, right? So let's say you're doing that, you're on the road, you get cut off, right? And all of a sudden you get really annoyed and you're going at it with the person next to you, you're yelling, you're doing gestures, all that stuff. That's an automatic response. But what we want to do instead is, let's say, instead of falling into that trap of yelling and honking our horn and screaming and acting like a fool, we ask ourselves, okay, this person cut me off. Yes, I'm identifying it. But is by yelling at them going to do me any good? First question. Answer is no. Is me giving them the finger going to do anything good? Is it going to help me at all? No. Is me then in turn cutting them also off on purpose going to help me and advance me in my life in any way? The answer to that is also no. So you see what we just did there? Now this happens quickly, right? You have to have this ready so that we can use this and turn to this in that moment, because it's so tempting to fall into that familiar classic association of freaking out when this person cut us off. But instead, if we ask these present moment self-questions real quick, even if it's just one of them, it allows us to use the rational side of our brain, the reasonable side of our brain, instead of focusing and going off purely on emotion and how we feel. Okay? So the same can be said with that breaking that automatic association with habits, right? You get a bad grade on a test. For my younger listeners, you may have a habit of saying, okay, I want to go do something, I don't know, insert whatever type of bad thing it would be. We can break that habit. We've got to break that habit. We've got to instead break that association and say, nope, I'm going to turn to use one of my positive coping skills today, or I'm going to do something else, whatever it is, but we got to identify it, okay? But that is super important to learn to break that automatic association, because otherwise, every time something happens that falls into the category of us being triggered to use that habit or do that habit, it's going to happen all the time, and it's going to start to take over, okay? So we want to learn to break that association. So as we're getting kind of going along here. We've got a few minutes left before we end the show. We still got some good stuff that I really want to say. I think something that's important, and I won't touch too much on this, but you can look this up and do the research on your own, because I think that's how everyone learns best. But there's something called the Self-Report Habit Index. Okay, now I'll say that again, the Self-Report Habit Index. And what this does is it helps identify what a habit is by a series of questions. There's about 12, I believe. I think this is something that was worth looking up for anybody who's struggling with a bad habit, or for somebody who's struggling with association of certain feelings and then turning to other habits, right? And if you look this up, essentially what this whole thing is, this index is it's going to be something that gives you a series of questions for you to answer that thought to. Okay, so you'll have a thought or a habit, whatever it is, you'll put that in as like X, and then you'll have these 12 questions, and it'll be like, I do this when I'm mad, or why do I do that? Does it help me? Whatever it is, and it'll be the series of 12 questions, and by doing that, afterwards, when you're done, it really helps you to pinpoint and identify more, A, what you're feeling, B, what that habit might be, and C, how you've reacted to it previously, and D, how you can change your reaction to it to make it something that's more productive for you. Okay, so I wanted to share that with you. Again, it's the Self-Report Habit Index. You can look it up and check more out about it. It's really great. So as we're winding down here, one of the things that I really want to touch on for this last part of the episode here is kind of a phrase that I could put this way. I think so many of us have this habit of telling ourselves that this habit is within our control when it's not. Right? We'll tell ourselves, oh no, I don't have a bad habit. Oh no, I'm not addicted to this functionality. Oh no, I don't have this, I don't have that. And in reality, we're living our lives completely like a puppet to that habit. Right? And this leads to just so many dysfunctional issues and problems for us. And in order to break that, we've really got to dive deep. But if we can first get to the point of not making a habit of telling ourselves that we don't have a problem, that could be a really good first step. You know, I'm not somebody who's ever partaken in any AA or anything like that, but from what I understand, I think that's one of the first steps is acknowledging that there's something wrong. And I think in anything in life, whether it's a relationship, a habit, a problem, anything, acknowledging that there is an issue and something's wrong is absolutely essential before anything else. So, to wrap it up today, everybody, I have this for you. Habits, they tell us who we think that we are. But when we start to break free from those habits, that's when we find out who we truly are. Right? Because habits will, and negative self-talk, they will speak all this garbage, all this mess, all this smack talk to you, telling you you're this, telling you you're that. You have to remember, that's not who you are. That's the habit talking. That's the insecurity talking. That's the dysfunction talking. That's not you. Right? And we find out who you truly are when we learn to break free from that dysfunction, from those habits, and from what we're hiding from. And we break free from that by learning to identify and learning to take action against that. And I think that's super important for you to all understand. And thank you so much for listening today for another episode. See y'all later. See you next week. Have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for tuning in. Scotty P signing off.